Hey guys, Dan McGuire, your Canmore Cochrane Realtor here. In this quick video, I want to break down my most recent blog article about key things you need to know when making an offer in Canmore, Cochrane, or really anywhere in Alberta. So let's get into it and break down these key items you should know about. So number one, does it cost you anything to make an offer? The short answer is no. I have buyers ask me all the time, is it risky for me to make an offer or what's involved in making an offer? And I always tell them, when you make an offer that's conditional, the seller is taking on all of the risk. That's because they're accepting your offer with strings attached, and you have 2 weeks, let's say, to complete all your conditions or walk away to your own satisfaction. So the seller is really promising their property to you for 2 weeks, and you can continue to shop around for other properties, or maybe even make another offer on another property if you'd like. So it doesn't cost you anything to make an offer, or it shouldn't cost you anything to make an offer. With that in mind, I only coach buyers to make offers on properties that they're really interested in, just because we don't want to waste anyone's time, buyer or seller. So next, is my deposit really refundable and how much should it be? Short answer, yes, your deposit should be 100% refundable. Always make sure you read the contract you're signing just to make sure, but typically in real estate transactions, the buyer's deposit is held in trust, and then it must be returned based on the terms of the contract and that trust. And usually it's just returned if the buyer chooses not to waive conditions. So maybe you'll pay $15 or something like that to wire it in, but that's really all it should cost you, and that won't be refunded. How much should your deposit be? Some buyers feel like the deposit amount is an opportunity to show how serious they are in an offer, or to really improve their standing. The reality is that with any offer, price and conditions are the most important thing to most sellers. I've seen deposits that are like $300,000, and the reality is that you're just putting that money at risk when you don't need to. So for most properties that are in the $500,000 to $1.5 million price point, the deposit should be $25,000, $50,000, maybe $75,000 at most. So what about conditions and terms? These are really the body of the contract and where the rubber meets the road, but there are some key differences between them. Now, conditions are for the specific benefit of either the buyer or the seller, usually the buyer, and they are things that need to be completed by a certain date and time for the contract to proceed. Typical conditions for a buyer might be financing, a property inspection, or a condominium document review, and usually they'll have about 2 weeks to complete those things. If they don't provide a waiver for those conditions, the contract will automatically fall apart. So it's really important to waive those conditions on time, or not waive them on time, depending on what you want to do with the contract. Terms, on the other hand, are a little bit more general. Technically, the entire contract is terms, so all of the words in the contract are terms. But as real estate agents, we will add additional terms at some times. Typically, terms are just something that the buyer and seller are agreeing to, that make up the language of the contract and how everything's going to work. So this might be, the buyer and seller agree that the buyer will get to take measurements one time before the closing date, or that they agree that the buyer could change their name to a corporation name if that's what their accountant advises. So they're not time sensitive, but they are really important to the contract. Okay, so what about dates you cannot miss in a contract? There are 4 really important dates in any contract. The first one is the possession date. Some people think this is the close date is the condition date, but the close date is actually the possession date. So this is the day where the money and the property will change hands. It can't fall on a weekend or a holiday, as banks and lawyers don't work those days. The next key date is the deposit date. Super important to get your deposit in on time. Technically, even if the contract is accepted, until the deposit is in the seller's hands, there really is no contract in a legal sense. So got to make sure you get your deposit in on time. The next date or set of dates that's important are those condition dates. Again, if you don't waive those conditions by the condition date, the contract just fizzles out and dies. So got to make sure you waive your conditions on time. And the last date, maybe the most important, is the acceptance date. So this is for the window of time the seller has to accept the offer. Usually it's a few hours, maybe 24 hours from when the offer's made. But the key thing is, until the sellers accept your offer, technically any other buyer could walk in the door at any time, and then you're into a multiple offer situation. So really want to make sure they accept in time. Okay, and then the last thing, the most important thing in any offer is, of course, the price. Now, there are a few things that I find are always true when it comes to the price of a property in an offer situation. Number one, a property is only worth what someone will pay for it. So as a seller, you can list your property for anything you want. You could list it for $50 million. But in reality, if no one's actually going to pay that price, it really doesn't matter. And no one's going to help you list that property. And you're going to end up spinning your wheels until you work your way down to the price that really makes sense. The flip side of that, a buyer and seller must agree on the price no matter what anyone thinks. So I'll have some buyers who are really, really analytical, and they do all kinds of work, and they dive into the comparables, and they look at what the science says this property should be worth. But in reality, regardless of what you might think as a buyer, the seller has to agree as well, right? So the price must be agreed upon by both parties, and that's going to take some give and take. And if you guys are just way too far apart, it's going to be a long journey to meet in the middle, or it's just never going to come together. So both parties have to agree on it. Now, for sellers, when it comes to pricing, it's all about money versus time. So people think that most sellers have, this really, really strong bargaining position, and that they're always having the upper hand in any negotiation. But in my experience, sellers can get anxious quickly, right? They've thought about this sale for a long time. They put a lot of time and effort into it, and maybe they have a couple weeks where there's no showings, or they have an offer that falls apart. Suddenly, they're not going to be as motivated based on price as they are based on time. So for a buyer, if you can make a good offer in a timely manner, right at the perfect moment, it could be the key part of making a deal come together. On the other side of things, for a buyer, it's typically about time versus opportunity. So as a buyer in the market, you can watch as many properties as you want go by and jump whenever you're ready. But for most buyers, if they miss too many opportunities, they're going to start to get antsy, right? They want to buy that property. They want to make that move. And they might be ready to throw price and money to the wayside because they don't want to miss those opportunities. So maybe they've been burned in multiple offer situations, or just the right property comes up and they really, really don't want to miss it. That can make them say, you know what, I'll pay your asking price, or maybe even more in a multiple offer situation. Not necessarily a bad thing. It's always good to get a great property at the right price, or a fair price, than to not get the property that you want. So, well, those are the key things that you need to know about making real estate offers in Canmore or Cochrane, or really just in general in Alberta, I find. If you have any questions about offers, or you'd like to read the full article, head over to my website at bowvalleyliving.com, and feel free to reach out to me if you have questions on any properties you're seeing or our areas. Thanks for watching.